Hello, everyone. Greg Staley here from Diverge Media. We're excited to bring this long-form style conversation to you on a very important topic for Canadians. So before we get involved, we're going to be joined by our contributor to Diverge Media, Gillian Davis, and we'll be joined by former RCMP officer Andy Brooke. And now, Andy is a retired RCMP officer. He was the lead investigator in the Iraqi helicopter case, where he faced the possibility of political interference himself. He took the RCMP to court and he won. He was one of the training officers of the Justice Counter-Terrorist Group. He co-wrote the People's Party of Canada's Veterans Platform with Kelly Lawrence. He's ran for political office twice. First time in 2015 with the Conservative Party of Canada and in 2019 with the People's Party of Canada. He is also the provider of the highly entertaining Garrettson Shorts on Twitter, or as Andrew Lawton recently said himself, Andy is an absolute Twitter legend. So without further ado, let's bring our guest aboard. There we go. How's that for an introduction? It's a little fumbly, but we got through.
I'm speechless.
So could you just walk us, Mr. Brooke, through kind of your experience in the RCMP, what you did there, and a bit of your career, because I think it's relevant to what you're about to present to us today.
No, thank you. And first of all, thank you, Greg, for inviting me to this interview. It's a really important topic and something I certainly feel strongly about. And anyway, in terms of my RCMP career, my career was roughly split between uniform policing and sort of the federal plainclothes FBI style policing. I served in British Columbia. I served in Ontario with work in Ottawa and Toronto and Kingston. I went back and forth a couple of times. My background, like I said, was regular policing, which I really enjoyed. I've done First Nations policing. I've done a lot of emergency response training. I was on the National Counter-Terrorist team for about 5 years. I was there during the handoff to what is now JTF2. I've done proceeds of crime work under the PCMLL TFA, the Act. I've done work in the penitentiaries. I've done a lot of different things. I just don't want to go on about myself like that. But you did mention the one case, the Iraqi helicopter case. That was in 1997. I was the lead Canadian investigator in that. And for your audience, the Iraqi helicopter case was an attempt, essentially, by bad guys in Canada and the United States to clandestinely smuggle surplus Canadian military helicopters, the CH-136 Kiowas, to Saddam Hussein's regime at the time. If people recall, there were United Nations embargoes against, and certainly military equipment was not supposed to be going to Saddam's regime. We were successful in that. You mentioned in your introduction about political interference. To be absolutely clear on that, there was no political interference in that case. There was one point in the case where a person from headquarters, who was a friend, maybe he was because he was a friend, he was asked to approach me. But he did say, in a calm demeanor, the Americans are watching this case, and Canada is up for a UN Security Council seat. Should this not go well, brackets, should we fumble the ball on this case, show that we can't handle this kind of case, it may impact our UN Security Council bid. So no pressure, right? But it wasn't interference, to be clear on that. We were successful in the end. We got most of the bad guys. We certainly got all the helicopters. Nothing made it to Iraq. And in the end of the day, the U.S. Secretary of State awarded our team sort of their highest award for cooperation. So it was a very proud moment for all of us. The other thing you mentioned, and I'm not sure for your audience if it was clear, I took the RCMP to court. It had nothing to do with political interference. I am the name on a federal court case that dates back to 1993. It was an administrative case. While I was on the counter-terrorist team, there was an administrative issue to deal with standby. Of course, on a counter-terrorist team, they have to have a team that's available to respond 24/7. At the time, the RCMP was saying, well, we're not going to compensate you for it. We're going to seriously restrict your lives. And you can didn't do it just for the fact that it's part of the job description of being on this elite team. Well, morale was very bad, to be frank with you, on the team. And to make a long story very short, have to go through the grievance process first, which I did. Of course, the RCMP is not going to rule in your favor in a grievance process. And you're then left with a decision. Do you go to federal court? I and one other person went to federal court. And in the end, we won a unanimous decision. The government did wish, we understood, they seriously considered taking it to the Supreme Court, but that didn't happen. So now that case is now case law in Canada. As an epilogue to that case, which is a sort of a sad note, while the ruling was positive in our favor, following the ruling, I got a call from our lawyer one day saying, Andy, I need your instructions to commence contempt proceedings against the RCMP. They're not abiding by the court order. So what we had was a decision in our favor, and the RCMP was sitting on it and not doing anything. I gave him those instructions, and as soon as we did, essentially that cleared the roadblock or the log jam, whatever the metaphor is. That's sad. That's I don't know who in the RCMP would have been making that call, but that's not the RCMP that I know.
Okay, to continue along here. So we talk about your background a little bit, and I think that's relevant to what we're about to talk about. So we talked about, we titled it The History of Political Interference. Due to recent revelations, I guess, or they're not proven, right? So maybe I would call them accusations that have come out of the Halifax Examiner talking about the RCMP commissioner interfering politically for political reasons in an ongoing investigation in the Nova Scotia shooting that took the lives of 22 innocent Canadians. And then we were talking about how this relates back to another case, that is PS 752, and how you were telling me you believe that this occurred already. There was political interference in the past in regards to this case. So let's start with PS 752. If you could lay the background for that for the audience, and how you're involved with that, and why you believe there is political interference that's gone on with PS 752 specifically. We'll start there.
I'd be happy to do that. PS 752, for the audience, that's sort of a short form that's used to describe the Ukrainian airliner that was shot down in January of 2020 over the skies of Iran, and Tehran specifically. The connection isn't going to be obvious to your audience, but there is a very distinct here between what came out in the Halifax Examiner story about the Nova Scotia Mass Casualty Commission. And I'll come back to that in a few moments. But in terms of the connection with PS 752, and you use the word accusation, I use the word allegations. What has not been reported in Canadian media anywhere is that approximately a year ago, in August, actually August 27th, 2021, I'm part of a group of Canadians who are concerned about how the government is mishandling this file, the PS 752 file. And we had evidence in our possession that we believed supported political interference in that case, some of which I'll be able to talk about if you wish. So we actually filed a formal public complaint against the commissioner of the RCMP, Brenda Lucki. We filed it through the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission. I had done some inquiries with some colleagues of mine. I was strongly advised by them to file through the CRCC for fear that the RCMP may bury the complaint if we had gone directly to them. The CRCC is empowered to receive complaints. And what happens in the process is they receive a complaint, they log it, they keep track of it, and then it goes to the RCMP for the internal investigation, or what we call in the RCMP a code of conduct investigation. Same thing. Once that investigation is done, there's some time limits and stuff involved. It would go back to the RCC that then would then act themselves, depending on what happened there. So when we submitted to the CRCC, within about 2 weeks, it was promptly transferred to the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, the NSIRA, which is this obscure body in Canada that handles national security matters. our complaint was deemed to have a national security implication. And that's what's important. So as I sit here, I don't want your audience to think, well, here's, a former RCMP officer who's involved with PS 752 and he's throwing around this political interference and he's trying to piggyback on whatever happened this past week. That's not what happened. The formal public complaint was submitted through a law office. It was submitted on behalf, the actual complainants are family members whose family members, the victims aboard that flight, were Canadian citizens. We can get into the jurisdiction later, but that's very important, the fact that they were Canadian citizens.
And that complaint was filed in August of 21, wasn't it?
August 27th, that's correct. Yeah. So why this is important, and I'll make this real, is once that was received and transferred to the National Security Agency, had there been no standing to our complaint, had it been seen as frivolous, something else wrong. That's why citizens is so important, because in Canadian law, criminally, we can't do anything with what happened with PS 752 for the permanent residents. And there were 30 permanent residents that perished on that. Still Canadians, but it's actually the 55 Canadian citizens that allow us the legal means by which to pursue this. We'll cover more of that later in this discussion. So with the fact that it wasn't sent back to us and rejected is a de facto acceptance of the fact that we have bona fide allegations of political interference. And that is now in the process. And I want to be clear with your audience. There's been no ruling or result issued yet. It's coming up to a year. What was interesting, though, was when it was transferred, the lawyer, the law office has submitted it, acting on behalf of our complainants, wasn't even notified until I believe it was the end of October. It was roughly 7 or 8 weeks, which seems odd, quite frankly, and struck all of us as odd on our team. So we have a formal public complaint, which does actually contain allegations of political interference. And the other thing that we have, where we specifically asked for a code of conduct investigation, again, on the actions surrounding Brenda Lucki, the commissioner of the RCMP, and specifically the complaint is founded on the fact that she made a decision to not open a Canadian criminal investigation into the murder of 55 Canadian citizens, when our laws, that is possible. And we're going to explore this further, but you'll have politicians out there and others, talking heads saying, well, there's nothing we can do. You'll hear all sorts of things. You'll hear that happened in Iran. The prime minister himself had said that.
Yeah.
And that's opening up a real can of worms. But quite frankly, there are certain offenses in Canadian law, and the offenses surrounding PS 752 allow for us to investigate and prosecute those, and eventually prosecute them as if they had happened in Canada.
Yeah, do you have those with you? And then we'll play the video of the government's official position that was caught on. Was that an undercover camera? It wasn't known that they had it on them. I don't think in that video.
Which video are you talking about?
We're talking the government lawyer.
Oh, Cameron? Michelle Cameron?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not an undercover. So what happened, I don't want to lose your audience here, forgive me. Cameron was one of a number of lawyers present when the Global Affairs Canada had a virtual meeting with family members to update them on the status of what was happening. And I'll let you play the clip without sort of stealing our own thunder here. But that was the video that was sent to me, which is used by permission, was dealing with a very specific question by one family member. And that family member himself, Shaheen Moghadam, sends the video to. We don't touch anybody else's questions. There's nobody else's conversations here. This is strictly that. But this would never have come out. And what your audience will be seeing is when we first learned what the official position of the government of Canada was on this matter. It has never been reported. I won't say it ahead of time. I'll let the audience watch this. But just before we do, if I can, Greg.
Yes.
Just let your audience hear that I'll just read directly from one provision of the Criminal Code. It says, notwithstanding anything in this act or any other act, everyone who commits an act, an offense in this case, outside of Canada, I'm editing a bit here because it's quite wordy, that if committed in Canada would have been indictable, meaning really serious, and would have constituted terrorist activity, which is what this offense has been deemed by a Canadian court already. We'll get into that.
We will. Yeah.
Then it is deemed that the act happened in Canada if any one of the aspects is met. And the first one is that the act was committed against a Canadian citizen. The fact that there was at least one Canadian citizen on board that aircraft gives us legal means. So when you hear something say we can't do anything, or worse, they really spin people and deceive them, manipulate them, when they say we have to go to the International Criminal Court. Absolutely wrong. We can issue our own prosecution, and we'll get into that more later.
Yeah, so just to touch on that, they're saying that we don't have jurisdiction. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but we can't do it because it happened in international waters. You read from the criminal code, if I'm understanding correctly, showing that we have jurisdiction under these parameters, and there was Canadian citizens involved. It's an indictable offense in Canada, so they should be. There's no excuse launching a Canadian RCMP-led investigation into what happened with PS 752.
And as you're speaking, Greg, I'm imagining there may be somebody out there watching this interview, somebody from the government, say, taking notes, right? And they're just dancing right now. They're going, "Oh, wait a minute, we disagree. This isn't terrorism. You know, we disagree with the finding of the Ontario Superior Court." So let me just say this for anybody who out there may be taking that inclination right now. Yeah, sure enough, you may have had another judge that could have made another ruling in that case. It really is neither here nor there. Justice Bello Baba in May of 2021 made the ruling that he did. He very clearly called this an intentional act, and he also called it an act of terrorism. But if I was a criminal investigator on this matter, so that's a civil case, but if I was handling this case now in the Canadian criminal case, which, as your audience will recall, has not been opened yet because the commissioner of the RCMP refuses to do it, which, you know, we allege is against her oaths of office. I lost my thought there, excuse me. The too much running around my head.
Here, well, I think it's a good time to pause. We'll put this video in and get it in. It'll give you a chance to gather your thoughts here, Andy.
Yeah, thanks.
So we'll go back here. This is a video Andy has sent us of somebody, a family member who has lost a loved one in PS 752. This is a government lawyer outlining the official government position on PS 752. They don't consider the downing. To be clear, 2 missiles hit this flight. They don't consider the downing of the flight an intentional act. But in the same breath, they refer to it as a crime and a criminal act. So we're going to play the video for everyone here. Just want to make sure I have it up proper. There we go.
A year and a half ago, and now after the year and a half, I asked him directly, "Are you still believe that the shoot down to the missile was intentional or not?"
So again, shipping, the government of Canada does not consider this an intentional act, and I know that you and other families feel differently. But with everything that we've seen, we do not believe, and I don't think this is the forum to really continue on, and I don't think this is the forum to really continue on that. We're going to have fundamental disagreements. Iran was in the wrong. They set the conditions for this horrible tragedy to happen. Regardless, that we are still pursuing justice. There was still a crime. Iran still set the conditions. And I know that we won't agree on the causes. That's where we are, but we can agree that we still have to move forward because Iran committed criminal and move forward because.
So we'll leave that there. Iran committed a criminal act, but we don't consider the downing of the flight an intentional act.
Yeah.
And we'll let you take it from there, Andy.
Yeah, thank you. So just before that, thought again. So before my gerbil inside my head there fell out of its spinning wheel, what had happened was I was imagining, if you will, which may be happening. There's somebody in the audience on behalf of the government making notes on this. And they're literally just spinning right now saying, well, they're talking about the terrorism. We don't agree with that position, yada, yada. There are other offenses, and that's where my thoughts went off the rails. There are other serious offenses, so you don't have to put all your investigative eggs. There is going to be, in my view, a Canadian criminal investigation happening here. There has to be. There is absolutely no way around it. And right now, we know what's happening in Ukraine. The government has tried to slough this off under the government of Ukraine. Again, I'm not going to go any further detail there. And of course, that's the, that country is in war right now. We should have done it in the first place ourselves. We had 55 citizens lost, and we should have done our own investigation and cooperated with any other investigation like Ukraine's. But there are other offenses. There are other offenses like detonation of a lethal device. That also has the same provisions, of course, being the Tor missiles that were fired at this aircraft. You have conspiracy to commit murder. One other thing that often happens, and I'll throw this out very quick because we probably won't come back to it, is you hear people go, oh, no, we can't do anything because they bulldozed the crash site. We lost all that evidence. They're not cooperative. They're out of the country. We can't get access to witnesses. All these obstacles people throw up.
Yeah.
Well, I'm an actual investigator. And when I handled, for example, as we mentioned earlier, the Iraqi helicopter case, there was a lot of that case that we chose, I made the decision, to pursue a conspiracy investigation. So when you have other obstacles, impediments, like crime scenes that don't exist, witnesses you can't get to, physical evidence that's been destroyed, a conspiracy investigation is actually very simple to pursue. In Canadian law, it's simply a criminal agreement between two or more people with an act in furtherance, essentially. It's two people agree to do a bank robbery. Well, people can say stupid things over a bar, drinking beer. But if they go out and get a handgun, if they go out and steal the car and get the stolen license plates and do acts in furtherance, the police can intervene in that before there's any actual bank robbery. In this situation, what I'm suggesting is that a criminal investigation, the decision would have to be made, but there are other ways to do this. So those are just excuses not to do an investigation of criminal law. And the thing about a conspiracy is that it carries the same penalty, life imprisonment for terrorism, life imprisonment for the detonation of an explosive or lethal device, or murder. They all carry the full penalty, even though it's a conviction for conspiracy to commit. To let your audience know, in Canadian law, an attempt only gets half the prison sentence. A conspiracy gets the full thing. So if that's the way you go, you're not losing anything by going that way.
And there was something like to get to specifically the political interference. There was the letter that was written to the families where the language was hinting at it wasn't Brenda Lucki that was making those decisions.
Yes.
That there was somebody else making those decisions. And I think that's what ties also into the Nova Scotia thing where
Absolutely.
she was being directed to make decisions that weren't necessarily going with what would be normal procedures within the RCMP.
That's a very, very good point. I think it's the next point to be made.
Would you like to read that into the record, Gillian? Do you have it in front of you there?
I don't, actually.
I do, I think, somewhere here. Is there a specific spot you're thinking of?
I'm thinking about a conversation I had with Andy before about the politicization of speech. And it was something to do with the way that it was worded in the letter, where it was, what was it?
I know what it was. I remember.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We'll take it away.
My gerbil is back in the wheel and he's running around again, so he's okay. When I read the statement on the Nova Scotia matter, the official statement put out on the same day that the Halifax Examiner story came out, as I was reading it, my mind immediately went to the letter that had been written by the commissioner of the RCMP, that's it right there, to last July. And because they are very similar stylistically. And to that, one thing I didn't say about my background and my training in the RCMP is I was trained as a forensic interviewer. And just a fancy term meaning that I've been trained to detect deception. We can all do it in various ways, but I've had the formal training. So when you look, and I'm looking right now at a copy of the statement by Brenda Lucki, when the public reads that, and they read everything in that, and we can pick it apart in a few minutes. But you read it and you go, oh, okay, she's kind of not saying there was political interference, and she's sorry for how she handled the matter and would have done better. That's not really what's being said here, and that's not really what's not being said. And that's the same approach that was done on the letter to the families. And that letter to the families is the formal letter upon which the public complaint, which, as we spoke about already, was submitted in August last year. Because that's where she says, we're not open. As a matter of fact, her exact words were, it was on page 1 of the letter, and she said, the commissioner of the RCMP, it was dated July 7th, 2021, while the RCMP is not conducting its own domestic criminal investigation into the Downing, and that's what we were looking for, quite frankly. We had gathered a lot of evidence up to that point, and we were waiting. We'd heard from the families that were present in meetings with the commissioner, but what you have essentially are people's perceptions of meetings. What we on our team and our coalition felt was we needed the actual evidence that she had said that. And we weren't certain how that was going to come about. We knew we'd eventually have it. When this letter was delivered to us, that was it. So the actual part that you're referring to, Gillian, is actually on page 2 of that letter. It's in the first paragraph. And that's the part that, for purposes of this conversation, is very similar to the statement, the style of the statement that is made in the Nova Scotia matter. Yes, I don't know if you can zoom in on that, but it's the top paragraph. So essentially what happens there, and I'll just keep it very simple here. In that paragraph, what she says is, well, quote, she says, a question was also raised on whether the decision to not commence or lead a domestic criminal investigation in Canada was an RCMP decision. She then goes on to say, it is indeed our responsibility to make these decisions. So she states the obvious. She knows it's her decision to make whether to open a criminal investigation, and she acknowledges that. But then as you go on to read, and this is where a little bit of analysis comes in, she says, quote, though we consult with legal counsel and other advisors. I want to pause there for a minute. That phrase, other advisors. There's no clarification as to what that means. The one thing in sort of forensic analysis of language is that if you're lying, if you're being deceptive, you cannot conceal it. There are indicators, there are anomalies. And that is your first anomaly right there. The people that wrote this letter know what's happening. And that's where it starts to peek through. She goes on to say, and other advisors on the potential viability of obtaining physical evidence. I've mentioned a bit about that already. Access to witnesses, I've touched on that. And consider related issues. What are the related issues? Are they political issues? There's nothing said in the letter. And then what happens? There's a period. And she goes, in this case, it was the RCMP that decided that Ukraine was the most competent authority to lead a criminal investigation into the Downing. There was a pivot there, and I missed it. She never answered the original question. She does not say in that paragraph or anywhere else in that letter that she made the decision to not open a Canadian criminal. And the fact that she doesn't say it is an indicator of deception. It's a very strong indicator. Because in my belief, and my view of this, and the rest of it that's in that letter, she's not able to say it. So lying takes a lot of energy. It's very difficult, especially for people that aren't accustomed to lying. And that is the way to be deceptive in an easy way. So what she does is she switches to another question. It's like a shell game. All of a sudden, she answers a question that wasn't asked. We're not talking about transferring this to the Ukraine. That, if I will, now I'm going to go over to the statement by Brenda Lucki on the Nova Scotia matter. That pivot that I just spoke about in that paragraph is very similar to the pivot in her statement to the second paragraph. All this stuff, the mea culpa, I'm so sorry, I would have done better. It gives it sort of this nice emotional feeling. She regrets how she handled it. That's all diversion.
Yeah, I'm going to read that in. She said the horrific events of April 2020 in Nova Scotia have forever changed the lives of victims' families, community members, and RCMP employees across Nova Scotia and beyond. Several days after the mass shooting, I met with Nova Scotia RCMP colleagues to discuss a number of things. This included the flow of information to RCMP national headquarters on the investigation and the public release of information. It was a tense discussion, and I regret the way I approached the meeting and the impact it had on those attendants. We'll go to Superintendent Campbell's comments after that led to this statement. My need for information should have been better weighed against the seriousness of the circumstances they were experiencing. I should have been more sensitive in my approach. Had I led the meeting differently, these employees would have felt more supported during what I know was an extremely difficult time. Notice, like, and for me, like when I was reading this, she doesn't say that they wouldn't have done things the same way. It's just I would have supported them differently. I maybe would have handled the way I spoke to them slightly differently, but I didn't get the vibe like she was outright. She doesn't come out and acknowledge Superintendent Campbell's comments outright. She doesn't deny them either. So she kind of leaves it in limbo. You talk about lying takes a lot of energy, and there's kind of easier ways to lie. And admission is one of those ways, in my opinion. Am I off the train?
That's a I use it in Alex. That's a well-crafted statement, but it's not.
Yeah.
The thing is with respect, Greg, you took the bait that many Canadians are taking reading that. You focus on the last paragraph. Some people have an awareness of what Superintendent Darren Campbell said in his notes. And when he described the tone and the tenor of that meeting, that very intense meeting, how people were reduced to tears in the room. And these are senior people who are probably not accustomed to being reduced to tears. You can only begin to imagine what that conversation must have been like. If it was that bad, and I don't mean if, since it was that bad, all she's doing in the second paragraph here, and whoever's written this for her, is basically acknowledging the obvious. That's all that amounts to. But go back to paragraph 1.
Perfect, and we'll read it in now. I want to acknowledge and address information included in the foundational document issued by the Mass Casualty Commission, MCC. As a police officer and the RCMP commissioner, I would never take actions or decisions that could jeopardize an investigation. I did not interfere in the ongoing investigations into the largest mass shooting in Canadian history. It is important to note that the sharing of information and briefings with the Minister of Public Safety are necessary, particularly during a mass shooting on Canadian soil. This is standard procedure and does not impact the integrity of ongoing investigations or interfere with the independence of the RCMP. I take the principle of police independence extremely seriously, and it has been and will continue to be fully respected in all interactions. And I'll let you go ahead and analyze that statement for us here.
Yeah. That statement, that paragraph, and as you emphasized in your reading, she says, I'll repeat it, I would never take actions or decisions that could jeopardize an investigation. That just jumped off the page to me. I've spoken to other people who have read this, and they thought that sounded odd to them. So people have a sense when something is being said to them that just doesn't fit right, doesn't sit right with them. But because of my training, I can tell you right now, that particular phraseology, so for all the cleverness of the people that may have written this, they're not that clever. Because when you use that phraseology, I would never take actions like that. Never is not a denial. Nowhere in this statement does she ever say, I did not experience political interference. She never addresses the actual allegation of political interference. What she's saying here is, I would never do it. But what she doesn't say is, she didn't say she didn't. And never is often by people when they want to make a denial when they're lying, because it's an easy way to lie. It's like when you ask somebody in an investigation, did you take the money? Oh, I would never take the money. But they're not saying they didn't take it. And that's exactly what's happening here. So that alone tells me this statement is accepted. You've got a large chunk of it that's devoted to this diversion here. It's the obvious stuff. People want to hear about it, but it is a diversion. What's interesting in there, I think, is something that we're not going to be able to speculate on, but right in the middle of that paragraph, she's talking about how she briefs the Minister of Public Safety. And she goes, sharing of information and briefings with the Minister of Public Safety. The sharing of information, absolutely understand. But when she adds and briefings, that just struck me as being very similar to what she said in that letter to the families, where she went, other advisors and other consider related issues. It's one of those things that's thrown in that has got a lot packed behind it. If that was a keyhole and you could peek through that word into what lies behind in that room, you'd see. So everything to me tells me that Brenda Lucki she's not being truthful in this statement at all. You can go to the bank on it. Absolutely not. And this is going to all collapse, around them eventually here.
We'll continue. I want to get Superintendent Campbell's comments that he wrote right after that meeting, just minutes after, on the record, so we can kind of keep developing everything that went on here. Oh, there it is. So Campbell's handwritten notes were made immediately following the meeting that described what happened. The commissioner was obviously upset. He said she did not raise her voice, but her choice of words was indicative of her overall dissatisfaction with our work. The commissioner accused me, of disrespecting her by not following her instructions. And then thinking about what you're saying on the briefing side of things, like information is normal, but you said briefings, it stood out to you in her statement. The commissioner accused me of disrespecting her and not following her instructions. I was and remain confused over this. The commissioner said she told comms to tell us at H Division to include specific info about the firearms used by the killer. However, I said we couldn't, because to do so would jeopardize ongoing efforts to advance the U.S. side of that case, as well as the Canadian components of the investigation. Those are the facts, and I stand by them. He also noted, he said the commissioner said she had promised the Minister of Public Safety in the Prime Minister's office that the RCMP, we, would release this information. I tried to explain there was no intent to disrespect anyone. However, we could not release this information at this time. The commissioner then said that we didn't understand that this was tied to pending gun control legislation that would make officers and the public safer. She was very upset, and at one point, Deputy Commissioner Brian Brennan tried to get things calmed down, but that had little effect. Some in the room were reduced to tears and emotional over this belittling reprimand.
Yeah. So that's a very good description of the intensity that we're all trying to imagine what it was like, people being reduced to tears. But go right back to the very beginning of what you read, and you read Campbell's handwritten notes made immediately following the meeting. Those are powerful. In Canadian law, police officers are expected to make his notes as soon after as practicable. And roughly speaking, it's about 24 hours. Those carry a lot of weight. If you wait longer to make your notes, they don't carry the same weight in the eyes of the court. The statement, in contrast, that Commissioner Lucki is making is a statement in response to the Halifax Examiner story. It's made long after. It's been crafted. This has passed under many eyes. She, like the letter to the families, she's signing off on it as her statement. But, here, I give, and I think a court would likely do the same, would give greater weight and authenticity and credibility to Superintendent Campbell's handwritten notes made at the time. And the thing too is, like, how would Campbell know anything about oncoming legislation? Like, if he's making this up, right? This is what, 10 days? It was April 28th was that meeting. It's approximately 10 days or 9 days after the shooting, after the event. And if you can't even begin to imagine what they were dealing with. And already they're doing what they need to do. They're tracing the firearms. That's involving Americans. Well, the Americans are going out on a limb for us. They're acting in response to the request. Since they don't know what happened in this, nothing is clear to them yet. The shooter may be dead, but you don't know who or what is behind this situation until you know. So you've got to do everything right. So if the commissioner thinks, she's got every right to know what's going on, to be briefed, but to stick her nose into the investigation, like is obviously happening here, and to direct things, especially when you're told, back off, we won't jeopardize it, and you still don't listen, and then you reduce people to tears.
Yeah, my understanding was that they said they would not release the information to the public, Halifax, Nova Scotia RCMP, or at the H Division. And she came out like a day after, the same day, and did her own interview saying these guns were used and this many people. And they kept changing the timeline. The numbers didn't line up. And she was going out and doing like an interview circuit at the same time that they were telling her, we can't do this.
She went against the protocol that was supposed to be in place. Obviously, she's under pressure to do that, to release something. I recall, I'm going by my recollection now, there was a video I was watching at the time where Commissioner Lucki was asked a question, and it was very obvious when Minister Bill Blair answered for her. And I'm not sure what had to do with the firearms. But clearly, Bill Blair was a looming presence over this.
Well, he would have to have been based on his position. It sounds like that might have been where that was being directed out of.
Well, of course, the disgusting part of this is that opportunistically, they're going to use this as a springboard for a political agenda. Like, darn the fact that there's a criminal investigation here. And when we say criminal investigation, let's keep this in mind. This is not an ordinary criminal investigation.
Yep.
This isn't a politician intervening inappropriately or
in, say, an SNC Lavalin kind of a, dodgy business kind of a way. This is people's lives were lost. A lot of people's lives were lost. This was serious. This was like the worst case in Canadian history. And there was interference that was happening while the investigation was ongoing. They had no concern for the families of those victims any more than they had concern for the families of the victims of that downed airline.
So in my view, my opinion, you have Brenda Lucki yielding to political pressure, bringing this into this meeting. She's not taking no for an answer. But then think about it. Actually, in 2021, you have a situation where conceivably, which is what we're alleging in our public complaint, which is she's actually in an internal investigation right now, a code of conduct investigation. And Canadians don't know that because it hasn't been reported.
Yeah. So this isn't number one with Halifax. Like, everybody's just becoming alarmed about the Halifax Examiner. They're like, oh, political interference. This is the first time here. No, to drive this home, this is the second time, and she's already under an investigation.
Out of an abundance of clarity, I'm using the word alleged. We have evidence of alleged political interference in the PS 752 matter. In other words, the pressure exerted upon her to not open a Canadian criminal investigation. One of those would be, she was told there will be no Canadian criminal investigation, and that something like that unfolded here. That's what we believe. Now, that hasn't been determined yet, all right? And I don't want to presuppose the outcome of any internal investigation. I think it's enough for Canadians right now to realize, holy Lifton, like, we're hearing this now, and people are upset over this. What's going to happen should it actually reach the level where the Canadian public become aware of the fact that she's under investigation right now for the same thing, for the second deadliest terrorist attack in Canadian history.
And we'll be following up with an article on this exact thing because, as you mentioned, no mainstream media or independent media to this point has picked up on this fact that this has already occurred and is an ongoing investigation. And it should have raised alarm bells prior.
It's becoming a pattern of behavior. And then you have to ask, I mean, not to leapfrog, but then you've got to ask about, what affected the Emergencies Act have? Like, could she have stood up against it at some point, or did she just let it happen because she's already been bowled over by the politicians in that universe? Like, is she really an effective leader for the RCMP that's supposed to be serving and protecting the Canadian public when she hasn't done in PS 752, she hasn't done in the Nova Scotia case, and what did she do whenever the Emergencies Act came up? Did she do anything? Did she stand up and say, no, this is wrong at any given point?
So I believe that there was something, we haven't even gone near this yet. On May 10th of this year, she testified on the Emergencies Act before the Parliamentary Committee, the EDC. And I watched her testimony and it was embarrassing. But I'm thinking from a government perspective, she left them hugely exposed. Shortly after that, she received from Mendocino, and Minister Mendocino, another name that's been in the news recently, he received a new mandate letter. And in the CBC story that I read, Mendocino made that was quoted as making this comment that her success as a commissioner will be sort of rated against this new mandate letter. And I thought, holy Lifton, here it is, probably less than 2 weeks or about 2 weeks after her testimony. They're getting ready to throw her under the bus. They just need a mechanism to do that. Now what you have is this. So now this is even a worse situation for the government. But think about it. If they pressure her right now, if she leaves office, if she decides to retire, it's not going to look good. If she resigns, it's not going to look good. She knows where the skeletons are buried. If what we allege in PS 752 is she was directed not to open up a Canadian criminal investigation, if she was directed to violate her oath of office, I don't know what kind of backbone she has as an individual, but if she sits there and says, you run me out the door right now, I'm coming clean for everything. And
another thing, Andy, just to add to the weight of all of this, you had told me about a case where the Canadian government were acting against, like in an adversarial way, against the families whenever they were trying to collect on or to seize the property of Iran to pay the civil charges.
Yes. So there was an Ontario Superior Court decision, a civil case, not a criminal case, that in May of 2021, last year, made the ruling that PS 752 was a terrorist act and it was intentional. So this isn't just Andy Brooke, former RCMP officer, using these words himself. These are the words of the Honorable Justice Bello Baba, the Ontario Superior Court case. What's interesting is that the government of Canada has tried everything it appears it can to avoid giving that more attention than necessary. But recently, fast forward now to April 1st of this year, I was present in the courtroom, virtual courtroom, for the hearing in Toronto. The families received, they had their decision. Justice Bello Baba, I believe, just before the new year, it was right at the end of December, issued his default judgment because Iran did not attempt to defend itself, did not appear in the court, $107 million judgment. The family then decided to go after the former diplomatic properties and some bank accounts that remain in Canada and within reach. And the hearing was set for that forfeiture just to settle the judgment for April 1st. And the irony that it being April 1st isn't lost on me, because at the 11th hour in our group, we get notification that the government of Canada has all of a sudden, the Attorney General of Canada has decided to, they're not a party of this case. This case is a private matter with the families. And what you were saying there, Gillian, which is absolutely correct, their lawyer, Mr. Mark Arnold, said, and we have it on video.
We'll play that after.
I won't take away from that video, but his words are that the government was, his words, not mine, hostile, threatening, and harassing to these families. And that obviously this government all smiles to these families in front of the cameras, but behind the scenes, it's daggers and everything they can to oppose these families. And everything I said there is completely able to be backed up. And I'll let you do your video thing.
Yeah, I'll pull that up with the auto here, and we'll get that played in so we can discuss. Is this the one? That's not the one.
Forward. In the past week, I have received what I would call threatening and harassing emails from the lawyer acting for the government of Canada. Very distressing emails. We have typically filed our material directly with the judge because we are bound to protect the anonymity and confidentiality on the public record of the people that we act for, some of whom fear reprisals from Iran. We filed it with the judge at his direction, and the government of Canada lawyer has written to me and insisting that they get our material. And frankly, I haven't responded. When they wrote to the judge and said, we want their material. And the judge has basically said that they're entitled to what is filed on the public record. And so we did, on the public record, file what we call redacted material that excludes the identification of our clients or their victim impact statements. Even having done that and having said that, the government of Canada's lawyer wrote to me again yesterday insisting on the redacted material. My response is, I'm more than delighted to cooperate, but it's a two-way street. I want a meeting with the minister responsible, particularly for the negotiations allegedly going on. I want a meeting with the minister, and we need the help of Canada. We will need Canada's help in the collection efforts to come. Once we get our compensation decision, we will need to collect on that. And that's really going to be the most difficult part of this case. I can also tell you that during this week, I also had a phone meeting with a lawyer in the United States whose name is Richard Heinemann. Richard Heinemann is one of the lead lawyers on the American cases against Iran that have gone before the American courts. He has tremendous expertise. In fact, Richard and I were on a speaking panel last week in a closed meeting of lawyers, more of an academic legal meeting on what all these cases mean. So I have direct contact with top American counsel on the issue of collections going forward. The final thing I want to say is this: it is beyond me why the government of Canada is taking such a hostile approach to the private law claim brought by the 5 families who I am acting for. I don't understand it. It's beyond me. But to try to answer my own question.
We'll just leave it there. I think that's a good spot to cut that. Yeah, it's a wild video where you're listening to the government, like you said, is putting on a face in public of politeness, of kindness, and then behind closed doors are saying they don't even acknowledge it was an intentional act, although an Ontario court has acknowledged it was an intentional act of terrorism. RCMP refuses to investigate this, though Canadian citizens were involved, and we have the jurisdiction to pursue it. Ukraine has been left in charge of the investigation. They are currently racked by war. So this is the situation.
For your viewers, to make sure it was clear, I'm not sure it is clear. That video, the origin of that video was Mr. Mark Arnold joined our press release, our press conference on the 27th of August, 2021. Earlier in our conversation, we talked about that was the date. That was when we actually submitted the public complaint against the commissioner. This is all part of the package that was unfolding at the time. We did this in a very measured and appropriate way. And Mr. Arnold, who is the lawyer acting for the families involved in that court case, asked to join our press release. That's why that video is in existence. And what you don't see is you don't see the CBC covering that. Any coverage, and I'll tell you this right now, and I get very strident on this, sort of a righteous anger comes out of me, because I know a number of these families, and I know, or I can see the pain they're going through and still go through. And to have the added injury on top of it, that they now have to also fight the government of Canada to obtain, it's just mind-boggling. And that's what comes out, and that's what you hear coming through in my voice. At least I hope it's coming through, and I hope it's restrained. But the CBC isn't reporting this. And I have nudged them repeatedly. I did it again today, just before this interview. I figured I'll throw them another couple of polite courtesy nudges. They don't. And this is what the CBC is not reporting. It has never reported the official position of Canada. Your viewers today have seen the actual video. I've sent that to the CBC. They've got it. They're aware of it. They're not aware. They've never reported about the public complaint being filed and the status of it now with the National Security Agency. That the commissioner right now is actually under a code of conduct investigation based on allegations of political interference in her decision not to have a Canadian criminal investigation in the downing of PS 752. Pretty relevant to what we're seeing coming out of Nova Scotia. This isn't the first rodeo here, if you will, for either the commissioner, Bill Blair, or Prime Minister Trudeau. CBC doesn't cover that. Like, explain to me why. I don't have the answers to this.
And that's one of the big problems, is that the general public, because they don't participate in alternative media, have no idea what's going on. The only ones, and I mean, I think we're the only one that's tying these pieces together, even in alternative media. But if you don't have the information, you can't make rational judgments on what's happening in your own country.
That's right. Can I just pick up on something, Greg? Well, yeah. I think it's nice right at this point. So your viewers have just seen Mr. Mark Arnold use all the words I just said: hostile, threatening, harassing. Again, those are his words as the counsel, not the words of Andy Brooke. I also said before we broke for the video that I was present in the courtroom. So I watched the lawyer for the Attorney General of Canada make an argument. And my opinion of it, as I watched it, was I thought, if Iran were present in the courtroom today, they wouldn't have had better representation on their behalf. And me, it's not going to, I mean, I'm saying that out loud now, but really, I know how ludicrous that sounds. But let me tell you, quote, exactly what Mr. Arnold said about that. And he said it to the to the judge during that hearing. He said, and it was on April 1st, he said, these are submissions Iran would make if Iran were here. The government of Canada is standing in the shoes of Iran.
So again, you're talking about the lawyer representing.
Yeah.
And again, those
families.
are elected representatives that are not representing the people. They are representing other countries and the interests of other countries. I just want to make that a very solid point here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to ask about, Mr. Brooke. Is there a bit of speculation here that this is about preserving foreign relationships and political relationships between nations, and that's why we're seeing, this disparage of justice that is not happening the way it should be happening? Do you think it's a game being played where we don't want to rock the boat with Iran?
This is a game. This is deadly serious. These family members in Canada live in fear of the reach of the IRGC, okay, and the agents. We just had the soccer game that was canceled, and IRGC agents. It was our group. Well, our group was part of the release of the information, not the sole people, that revealed we received actual confidential information that there were going to be IRGC agents posing as journalists attached to this game. Now, the game was shut down eventually, but they're always trying to get into Canada. They are in Canada. We've had situations ourselves where we suspect that we were under surveillance. That's happened on at least one occasion. So the families are very cognizant of the reach and threat that Iran poses. So what happens now is you have the government of Canada, who is not incapable of doing that, because I've already addressed the fact that our laws, you open up an RCMP investigation, there are competent investigators, and we can have a Canadian criminal investigation. But the fact that that hasn't happened sends a message to Iran. And the message is that you're not going to be held criminally accountable. We're going to try to get this off in terms of reparations. This is officially what they're looking for. Return the belongings you took, say you're sorry, and cut us a check. Well, the families view that as blood money, quite frankly. They want justice. Justice for them is criminal accountability. We haven't even gone near there. I could explain that, but that is absolutely possible. But you have the senior advisor on this case to the Prime Minister out of Global Affairs Canada, Payam Akavan is his name. And on another video, which I didn't send you, but which is in my possession, from Shaheen Moghadam, that exact same day where Michelle Cameron is stating the position, there's another thing where Payam Akavan is manipulating Mr. Moghadam. He's saying things that are not so. Or he's throwing up chatter to confuse and release someone on what Canada can and can't do internationally. And it really is horrible for me to watch, because Shaheen Moghadam now I know personally.
Well, do you want to? Is there a question you think needs to get asked on this before I pull the next?
I don't think I answered your question actually, and it just occurred to me: why is this happening? Why would the government? Let's suppose that our allegations are not only founded but substantiated as a result of investigation. Why would the government of Canada not want the murder of 55 of its citizens? There's got to be a big answer to this. And the first thing I believe that is reasonable to say, without sounding like I am speculating, is the fact that a competent investigation by the RCMP is going to immediately produce evidence of terrorism by the IRGC. This government has refused to list this entity, what remains of this entity, as a terrorist entity. That is obviously important for Iran, and our government has taken the position that doesn't want to be difficult with Iran on this. And it's going to be very difficult if there's a Canadian criminal investigation for two reasons. One, you're not going to be able to you're going to have evidence of terrorism. And you're also going to have Iran going, well, now we've got this hammer hanging over our head, because a Canadian criminal investigation, if it results in charges, and you just put out the red notices with Interpol, and those who we charge inside Iran with conspiracy to commit murder, whatever the offenses are, terrorism related, the lethal device that I spoke about earlier, they can't leave the country because they're going to get picked up and they're going to get extradited. We don't need the International Criminal Court. I won't go any further than that. That's all red herrings and just fog and smoke that's put out there. Canada can issue its own warrants.
Then I suppose the question is, why is Canada doing this?
That's what we don't know. So it's obviously huge. It's obviously kept out of view. There's obviously an agenda. But we don't know. Or others in our group, because we've all seen evidence. I mean, we haven't even hardly touched on them. This is the tip of the iceberg stuff. And I mean, look already, we're about an hour into this long form conversation. And there is so much more that I could have shared with your viewers that we are able to share. There's stuff that I won't be able to share that's in the complaint. But we have a feeling that, yes, there's obviously got to be another agenda, but is there some sort of bullying, intimidation, extortion going on? We don't know the answers to these, and we will not know the answers until there's a criminal investigation. But if there's a criminal investigation that's allowed to do that independently, without political interference, competently done, properly resourced as well, so as the government doesn't pull, I'll just get ahead of this right now, so the government doesn't think it can open a criminal investigation now and then starve it and it wins on the vine. So which
is what they like to do with, isn't it the Ethics Commission, that there's no way they can actually effectively do an ethics investigation because they have no money and ancient computers and stuff?
Good point. Yeah, it's not like they don't have a history of doing this, right? So I mean,
patterns on top of patterns on top of patterns on top of patterns.
Yeah. For those willing to see. Yep.
Yeah.
So Trudeau, there's two things here. We've already discussed at some length that he got the RCMP commissioner, this is me saying this now, that this proves out that there was political interference and there was political pressure put that there will not be a Canadian criminal investigation. And Commissioner Lucki yielded to that, sad to say.
And then you extend that out again, just for people here, the connection, you extend that out to what happened in Nova Scotia and the recent allegations that have come to light about political interference again, and you see the pattern connect. It lays over top of itself, as you said to me in our conversation yesterday. It's apples to apples.
Thank you. It is apples and apples. This is two mass murders. I mean, and forgive me, I don't mean to make apples and apples sound like a light comment, but it is literally the same thing. It really is. And that's what we're trying to do here, is draw attention to that. The other thing, too, I just mentioned, so you have Commissioner Lucki saying no criminal investigation. So Iran hears or learns we're safe, we're in the clear, we're not going to be facing these, criminal accountability to Canadian courts, all right? But the other piece of the puzzle that was missing, and which Trudeau has in his hand, was the Jaworski report, which is often referred to as the forensics report. It came out in June of 2021, just about 2 weeks before she wrote that letter. And in it, there is, it's a long report. And frankly, when I read it, to me, it was nothing more than a glorified scrapbook of open source public domain material. There was a lot of problems with that report. But what stood out to me was the one line, which Prime Minister Trudeau refers to, and it's where it says, quote, in it, it's from page 8. It says, while the forensic team found no evidence that the downing of flight PS752 was premeditated. Again, they're not accepting intentionality, right? Just like in the statement.
Was that, you said, sorry, that was the forensic team?
That was, it's the Jaworski report. He was the lead on that case. And it's called the forensic report.
Is it the same forensic team that Canada put together that was based off of the information the AIB was giving on? Because that's what I was reading. So I just want to drive that home for people. Is this it? Yeah. So introduction. Here's I was looking through this last night. The downing of Ukraine International Airlines.
Yep.
Hopefully I didn't lose what I was just.
That's the prime minister there.
Here we are. They said the findings and conclusions in this report are informed by a comprehensive analysis of the reports produced by Iran's Aircraft Accident Investigation Board, AAIB, and other publicly available information. So your comment about it seemed like it was publicly sourced materials and things that could have been found is probably true, because they say right there that they did publicly source some of the info. But that is just, okay, so we're going to get our information for our forensic report from the guys that have a vested interest in not telling us the truth.
Oh, it's worse than that.
Drive it home.
I'm going to lose your audience, and I don't want their eyes to cross here, and I don't want to go. But I'll say I'll keep it short. I've read the report once. I couldn't stomach to read it twice. I read it in great detail. I had all sorts of different color highlighters in front of me, all sorts of margin notes, because I didn't want to have to read it twice. I was going to do it properly. But when you see questions being asked in the report, we raise a concern about this or about that, and then they go to answer the question. In other words, what would be acceptable to the government of Canada as an answer to this question, effectively, is this. They don't say it like that, but that's how it reads. They're saying, these are our concerns with Iran's report. Then
they basically gave them the guidelines on what they wanted to hear. Tickle our ears with
a face-saving. If you answer this is a face-saving way that we can. Yeah, it is such a joke.
Isn't that kind of like leading the witness or something in a court of law?
Yeah. Well,
here's the question. Here's the answer we'd like to hear. If you can make it sound something like this, that's what we need.
Here's what we want you to say, but in your own words. Could you please repeat it back to us?
That's pretty much how the Trudeau government works, isn't it? They give you the words they want to hear, and if you say anything outside of the parameters of those words, then you get canceled, or you
lose funding.
You're talking word phraseology. So let me go back to what I just read and say something else to you. I read the line from that report. While the forensic team found no evidence that the downing of flight PS752 was premeditated. Found no evidence, okay? There's a very common saying out there that is absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So I'll repeat that. Absence of evidence, which is what that statement reads, it does not mean is not evidence of absence.
You could say we have found no evidence, but if you're not looking for it, I mean, that's technically a true statement, right? Like, I didn't find it, but I didn't look for it either.
Yeah, I really am restraining myself right now, because I'm reading the report. If I had the copy of the report behind me with all my pretty notes and color highlighting, that would be a whole program unto itself. And I don't think your viewers honestly need that. I think what we tried to do today is to say, how on earth is Nova Scotia, what's happening there now, in any way connected to PS752? Like, I mean, how do you even connect those dots? And I think we've done, I hope, something that's understandable and a reasonably good job at that today.
I just want to read the Prime Minister's statements. We talked about this before we went live, and I just want to read them in, because this was on the mass shooting. This is Justin Trudeau's comments on it, of the allegations of political interference from RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki. He said, on suggestions they interfered in the probe into Canada's worst mass shooting in order to push gun control measures, he said, absolutely not. Now, this was, I'm going to just say it outright, stuck out to me like a sore thumb. We did not put any undue influence or pressure. It is extremely important to highlight that it is only the RCMP, it is only police that determine what and when to release information. So technically true, they are the ones to release, but he says undue here. And that word for me just stuck out, and I just wanted to get your comments on that, because it comes back to the phraseology, right? It's not easy to lie, and even for a practiced liar like the Prime Minister, it still comes out.
Well, in this case, he also used the word absolutely, which is an unnecessary word. You know, if you're telling the truth, you don't need to say I swear or to be honest or use the word absolutely, okay? He does that to strengthen a statement which he knows is weak. You've also, in this case, it sounds like this was an answer to a question. This was a on-the-fly kind of answer. It's not a prepared or crafted statement like Brenda Lucki that we were referring to earlier. No, it's again, it's the same thing. It's all deceptive, and that's why I believe that this is a house of cards, and it's going to come down. I think what will be very interesting to watch will be what happens. I mean, people on social media are speculating that Lucky's going to be thrown under the bus. It's another woman. I mean,
Yeah, that feminist prime minister, he just does love his women to put in.
But
throw in front of the bus, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. He puts them up there so he can knock them down.
He just admires strong, independent women that will do what he says, and until they do, like, they're in good terms when they do what he says. But if they don't, they may find themselves at the end of a political career.
And here's, I mean, I don't know Brenda Lucki, so I don't know how much of a spine she has. She's cornered right now, quite frankly. Yeah. And, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that what you've got here will be watched by the RCMP. The people, and somebody in the office there is going to watch this. I know from another officer that's retired out there, he's in Western Canada. His name and probably my name float around the office of the commissioner on occasion, right? And he has his own story. He is critical of this government, and resources have been deployed against him, and he is an upright guy. Like, this is just a retired RCMP officer, no different than me, you know. But our offense to this government is that we are critical of it. And if I will, can I imagine something here for a moment? It just popped into my head. I think we shared this. I shared this with you yesterday. Actually, we were just having a conversation prior to this interview. And however this unfolds, whatever happens to Brenda Lucki, and I do believe personally that her days are numbered.
Yeah.
Who's going to go with her? I don't know. And how it's going to come about, I don't know. And how big this snowball gets as it rolls down the mountain, does it become an avalanche? I don't know any of this. But as I imagine, whoever becomes the next commissioner of the RCMP, he or she holds a news conference. If it were me, this is what I would say. I would get in front of the mics and I would say, I'm well aware of the situation that brings me here. And I'm going to tell you right now that the RCMP, the image of the RCMP and the integrity will be restored. And if any politician so much as tries to influence me or pressure me, I will hold another news conference and I will out you immediately, and you will get nowhere. And I think if the Canadian public heard something like that, they would realize that whatever damage has been done won't continue.
We talked about this, me and Gillian, but like, I don't think people understand how, you know, you hear political interference and you kind of, oh, okay. You know what I mean? It doesn't have the, oh, okay. Again, like, there's more political, oh, okay. But it's no. Like, if this is being directed from the Prime Minister's office on gun legislation to promote, like, to interfere in an ongoing, the biggest mass shooting in Canadian history, the RCMP, by definition, can't say that they're independent of the federal government. Like, it seems you would have lost the ability to say that when the commissioner seems like she's influenceable, and then it just leads to a lack of trust because you don't know where that ends. Where does it end? Is it on some things? Is it on a lot of things?
God bless Superintendent Darren Campbell.
Yes.
Clear from his notes that he pushed back and stood up to what was happening. And God bless all the Darren Campbells in the RCMP who do take their oath seriously, who do take the charter and the rights of Canadians seriously. The RCMP image, I read the comments all the time online. People have lost faith. But I can reassure people that the vast, vast majority of people in the RCMP will stand up for the rights. But this, and maybe this is necessary to happen. Maybe what's unfolding right now is exactly what's needed.
Well, I did hear someone had said that currently the state of Canada right now is that it is a dictatorship masquerading as a democracy. And that is, it is a scary thing to look at whenever you see so many of our institutions that are supposed to protect our rights are failing us.
It was, you know, like you heard earlier, or I mentioned earlier, that, you know, I took the RCMP to court. I'm not afraid to stand up to them. You know, that was a very important issue. The morale is what made it important for me to stand up. The other guys on the unit didn't seem to see a way to deal with this. And of course, there was a risk attached to one's career, because if you stand up, you know, there's lots of places to be transferred to in Canada. A lot of them north of the Arctic Circle too, right? So
I was thinking, we don't have Siberia, we might have worse.
Here, let me tell you something that just popped into my head. I was very careful in that. Because I was a member of the National Counterterrorist Team, when I hired my lawyer to go to federal court, he hadn't even seen a copy of my grievance. I waited till everything was cleared through information access. I did everything properly, because what I was afraid of was that the RCMP, or the government at the time, if they thought, well, we'll teach Brooke a lesson, we'll do a search warrant on his lawyer's office and we'll get him in breach of his oaths or whatever, right? So I did everything right. And what is really interesting was the day of the hearing in the Supreme Court building, actually, it was in one of the federal court chambers. There was one point, there was 3 judges, the center judge, the senior one, turned to my lawyer, kind of with a wink and said, I bet you've been privy to some information maybe you shouldn't have had. I'm just wondering about that kind of thing. I'm paraphrasing. My lawyer sprung to his feet and he said, I can assure this court that as an officer of this court, at the time, Corporal Brooke has not done any such thing. And you know what? For everything I did to maintain integrity in that, even if it was to the detriment of my own application and the court case, I did it because I knew it was the right thing to do. Had I not done that, had there been, it never would have come out, because a lawyer solicitor-client privilege is sacred, right, in our system. Never would have come out. But my lawyer would not have been able to have said what he said with the intensity and strength that he said it. And I thought, you do things right and you do it properly, right? Mm-hmm. Once in a case, it was just a routine case, but I had a disagreement with the supervisor. This has nothing to do with political interference. And a supervisor was basically saying he didn't agree with my decision not to charge somebody. So to charge somebody in Canadian criminal law, you have to have reasonable and probable grounds. And I didn't feel in this case that the evidence supported that. I was not going to charge this person. Some people might have taken the view, well, charge them and let the court sort it out. Well, if I charge somebody, I could potentially ruin their life. And I take that very seriously. I wouldn't do it. So I have this vigorous discussion with a supervisor at the time, who essentially didn't order me, but he was getting in that direction. And then I challenged him and I said, are you considering ordering me to charge him? Which, first of all, he wouldn't be able to do because it's not a lawful order. But I said, well, I just want you to think this. So you're going to order me potentially to commit perjury, because I put my hand on the Bible when I lay those charges. And if I don't believe it, that's perjury. So I looked up and said, you charge him. I'm not doing it. And of course, the situation died, right? But how many times in this country does that have to happen where people do, right? And do the right thing?
I think he nailed it. And I've thought about this quite a bit. And Gillian, I'd love your thoughts on this. But we were talking, how do you make an impact? How do you do your part? And it just takes, if you're a street sweeper, be the best damn street sweeper you can be. Do the best you can do wherever you are at. And if there was good people in positions everywhere, you would have a different culture, a different Canada. And maybe we'd have a more accountable Canada. Because I know personally, I know it bothers Gillian. I'm sure it bothers you, Mr. Brooke, as a former RCMP officer, but I don't like when guilty people get away with things. I don't like lying. I don't like manipulation. And I don't like people like that advancing their careers on the backs of people that are willing to do the right thing. And that often seems like what you see at a high political level and at, in institutions at the high levels too.
Okay. So you have to, and the examples I've given are my own personal examples. This is done thousands of times a day and people aren't even aware of it. There are police officers acting with integrity out there every day. All right. Of all police forces. I'm not just talking about the RCMP. And, another example would be once in an investigation, some evidence was brought to my attention that was obtained properly in one way, but I should not have seen it. And it was literally dropped in front of me. And there was nothing I could do to make it undropped. I had seen it. And there's no way I could pretend not to see it. Or I suppose, as I was writing the search warrant, I could have left it out, but I don't do that. And officers don't do that, not those that operate with integrity. So what happened was when I delivered the warrant to the justice, I explained to the justice, as I dropped it off, I said, in there, I'm addressing a matter, because you don't engage in a lot of conversation with the justice. They make their decision based on what's in the 4 corners of the warrant. But what I did and the justice would have read it because it was in the warrant. I didn't have to tell him, and I wouldn't tell him. But what I said in the warrant was, I said, look, this is what happened exactly as it unfolded. You know, unbeknownst to me, somebody walks in, drops this piece of evidence in front of me. There were means to get that evidence to be admissible, but I hadn't done that, and all of a sudden now I'm aware of it. And what do? I can't unsee it. So I said that, and I asked the justice to not rely on it. I said, I've seen it, but please, this is what I know. This is all I know about it. Please don't rely on it in your decision to make this warrant. I'm just disclosing it. And that is actually the correct answer. And
I think that's like, for Canada, that's kind of always been our, the perception from outside, and something that we've always prided ourselves on is to do things above board, to punch above our weight, to be the squeaky clean country that does things the right way. And unfortunately, over the last, particularly, probably the last year in particular, I mean, it's been creeping, but like the last year has just brought it so much to the fore. The amount of rot and just horrible things that are happening in this country. And it just feels like we're powerless to do anything about it. We have this big protest, many protests across the country, and we're so spread out. It's hard to make that look as big as it really is. Then you have all of these all of these truckers go across the country saying, hey, pay attention to us. And instead of being paid attention to, they're vilified. And I mean, the Emergencies Act was just insane that was brought into force, particularly when you compare it to, what was it, the year before, and the Wet'suwet'en protests that were very, very similar, including roadblocks and all of that kind of stuff. But because the ideology was different, because what was being protested was different, one agreed with the government idea or ideology, however you want to put that, and the other one went against what the government wanted. The one that went against the government got so crushed by every means possible the government had, compared to one that was much smaller, but ideologically in sync with the government, and they were treated like with kid gloves.
But that narrative, you know, unfortunately, this is a fallen, imperfect, broken world. But we can see the narrative around the Emergencies Act that you're talking about unraveling right now. And Mendocino is not as a beautiful person. There's a whole other situation Prime Minister Trudeau is dealing with right now, and he's got a number of things that are unraveling. And again,
like traveling with COVID, that was a good one.
8 days after popping positive, and then telling unvaccinated people that they need to test regardless.
But what you're doing here is, I mean, I'm in a unique position. I mean, just because of what I've been involved with the families of Flight PS752, and only because of my unique position, can I say and show to people, whoa, you know, how else would Canada become aware except through the efforts of our coalition, the fact that we made a public complaint based in part on allegations of political interference? That would not come out. But those of us that are involved in the coalition that have brought this about, the courageous family members that stood up, have gone to court, have actually put their names publicly on this document that now sits with the National Security Agency investigating it. I mean, all this has been done, and right now is now relevant in a totally, I mean, nobody would have seen this coming, any sort of connecting the dots here. And I'd like to hope that justice prevails. I think we're all doing what we can do. Where this goes from here, who sees this? I mean, there is a great deal of information we haven't even touched on yet. But
if you want to, I'll add, if you'd like to do another in-depth conversation, we would love to have you back. I don't want this to, like, I understand what it's like when you have these conversations. Certain things drive the memory certain ways, and it can go.
I don't mean that. My chuckle is because God bless your audience if they can put up with me for another hour and a half. I think today, I trust that what we've covered was what needed to be covered. And the stuff we didn't get to wasn't necessary today. If it comes out later, then it'll come out later. But right now, I believe we've accomplished what we needed to. And I hope and pray that the light is brought into this darkness, which is what we're speaking about here. There is darkness in both these situations. And I'm very passionate about this. because I have come to know these families. And I mean, I have no connection. I mean, here's an obvious thing. I have absolutely no connection to PS 752. My background is not Iranian Canadian. I didn't know anybody on the plane. I just have no connection. And people will ask me, like, why do you feel so strongly? Well, actually, a quote I like to give, and I've actually just got it sitting right here. Benjamin Franklin did a quote, and he said, "Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are."
Love it. That's probably the perfect way to analyze what's been going on.
And I hope your audience, if anything we have said has moved them to become outraged at what is happening here. I'm being very polite. I'm using the right words. I'm saying, I'm being measured. I know how to speak.
Your Canadian mystique is still about you.
Well, no, but it's also, you use the word alleged. You're innocent till proven guilty, And there is an investigation underway. I mean, I can't presuppose the outcome of that investigation, but Canadians need to know there is an investigation underway, and it's for the same thing as what they're now hearing in Nova Scotia.
And there should be another investigation into that as well, if there isn't one already.
Yeah.
I think that's a good spot to end it for PS 752 and the Halifax, the political interference allegations that have come in the Halifax Examiner on the Nova Scotia shootings. We thank you, Mr. Brooke, for joining us. Again, former RCMP officer, a very experienced man in the force, and he's come out in you were vocal. I just want to add this. You were vocal, you said, online for about a year, and actually some of the families had reached out to you after your criticisms. And so I just wanted to speak to that. If you're watching this show, you don't know, if you take a measured response and you do the work and put in the effort, how far that could cascade you into a direction you didn't expect. So if you want to help, share this out, get involved, contact people, figure out what you can do in your place in sharing this information out. We can't do it alone. Independent media doesn't have the funds, and we often get throttled back, and we deal with social media blockades. So we need individuals like yourselves that are watching to help share this out. So again, thank you for joining us, Mr. Brooke. Is there anything you'd like to close with, or places that maybe you'd like to direct people for information?
No, I don't like self-promotion, but I do want to say thank you. And not just for having me, but having me on behalf of the families, behalf of the others in the coalition that are unnamed here. You don't see their faces here. There are others standing behind me who are also willing to come forward and be on camera. There's the lawyer that filed this public complaint. There's, and I won't name anybody else, but there are family members who would, this was short notice, that could come alongside here. I'm not the face of this, but today I won't decline an opportunity to say what I know needs to be said. So thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And I feel it is an important story to get out to Canadians. So we're more than happy to have you on Diverge Media to hopefully broadcast that message and get it amplified, hopefully.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. All right, we're going to continue with the show. We got a few things we're going to cover off. Gillian, I'm sorry. Are you good for another 10-15? We had him on the list. I put him on the thumbnail. I feel like I owe people here.
It's like a never-ending story. This has been a crazy, crazy week. There has been, and I don't know if it was on the thumbnail, but there were 3 days of citizens hearing this week where they were going through a lot of the information about COVID. One of the people that was on the panel that's probably the best known was Preston Manning. So it wasn't some kind of small fry kind of a deal. It was a big deal. So they are going over it and doing almost like a forensic look at how people have been affected, and like from the lockdowns, COVID, the masking, everything. They're looking at all of it. And one of the things that's coming up very, very early was that people just felt they weren't being listened to. They weren't getting answers. They weren't being listened to. And that needs to end. Our representatives are supposed to represent us. They're not supposed to be running their own game. And it doesn't matter what bureaucrats you've got or judiciary or anything else. They work for the tax-paying people of this country, and they need to remember that or be reminded of it. And I think that's where we're at, right? So
you'll be reporting on that. You've been in doing a lot of digging and research on that. So just people keep an eye for that story to come out. and we look forward to it. It's so we had two other things on the list. I'm just trying to think. We had the Bayer CEO said, "What now?" And then the second was, I have mortgage. Oh, I have Flying J. What else do we have? There's a few. I feel like I'm missing one that I wanted to cover. It's your UBI. Well, my goodness. So let's have that discussion because we had UBI, Universal Basic Income. Is it coming to Canada? So there is a group out there that is a high level think tank, right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that seems to be the case. Yes.
Well, high level in quotes think tank.
That implies intelligence, which we're sort of going. I don't know. But anyway.
After reading said report, I don't know. So you have this high level. Okay, you got me wanting not to say. You have this think tank that has put out this document suggesting a path towards universal basic income in Canada, and you've been pulling some information out of there about how they're proposing to do this, how this would affect Canadians. And I guess the other thing I need to look into is if there's a Privy Council connection to maybe that paper, because that's always, the hidden hand. But let's walk the audience through that paper and kind of what they're proposing.
Well, UBI is kind of an interesting thing or universal basic income. So it's been tried out in different countries. It's even been shopped and possibly tried out in Canada. I'm not sure exactly all the details. I know there was a pilot program that was supposed to be happening in PEI. I don't know if it actually happened because a lot of things went squirrely with the pandemic. And then in Toronto, they had 4,000 families apparently that they were going to try this out on, or 4,000 individuals. And it wound up getting scrapped whenever Doug Ford got office. What was that? 2017, I think 2018. So they're serious. And right now it's Bill S-233 in the Senate right now, where they're looking at insisting that the Minister of Finance, who of course is the Minister of Everything, Chrystia Freeland, create a framework for potentially UBI in Canada.
And then in that framework, in that framework, we were going through their proposal. Like you would think government, because normally when people think of UBI, they think, well, that's stupid because they're going to put it on the backs of government debt, and they won't it's just
better than that.
It's much better. But wait, there's more. Like this is the UBI from hell. Like let's just go through the proposals.
Cracker Jack box. Here you go. Canadian taxpayer.
I'll give like a 15,000 foot view of their scenarios, but essentially they lay out all these different scenarios in this report. Again, the article will be coming probably within the next week or two, so I don't want to put a timestamp on it. I know you're digging. So that's ready to go. Yeah, Monday. That will be published Monday.
The one that's there right now is kind of the quick overview. We will probably dig into this further because it is, and I talk about it in the article, it is a very complex issue, especially in a country like Canada.
Yeah, so they tie all these different scenarios, like some government funding, some business funding, some household funding, they call it. Household funding is like code for it's going to be you. Like you're the household.
You're paying for it.
You're the guy. Like we're going to put it on the backs of taxpayers and maybe income tax and landowners, things like that. So they have the different scenarios, but this was the funny part. And I sent it to you when I dug it up. And I said, like, they're talking about the best case scenario here is that we put all of the responsibility on the backs of household owner, or what do they say? Households? Not household owners, but they say households because it works out the best for GDP growth in the long term is their justification. And then they say, basically, if everything goes well, yes, things will go up. Inflation will happen, but relative to that inflation, your basic income will improve your quality of life, essentially, was the argument they were making. Like you'll be above the inflation line.
I would like them to show their work.
There's no references in that report. Trust me, bro.
Show me the math. Show me your work. I want to see the numbers. And if you can't show me the numbers, and here's the thing about UBI, it has been tried in different places. The places where it's been tried, and Finland was one of those places, they scrapped it because it wasn't having the effect that they wanted it to have. They have apparently tried it out in North America as well. Same deal. It has not had the effect they were hoping it would have. So and then you're looking at all the different social programs and stuff and what people really need. And then you've got, because it's based on cost of living, but the cost of living in this country is different in every province and every area of every province.
Yep.
So how do you even that out across a country like Canada?
Well, for instance, you would have a higher UBI in Toronto, but if they're flatlining because they say, look, these are the averages, this is where we're going to put it, it doesn't make any sense because the cost of living in Toronto is like 30% higher. So if that's going to up your average basis, then you're going to be way over budget, which means your whole GDP projections compared to debt are off anyways. So it doesn't make any sense. Like where I'm living compared to where I was is a lot less if we're talking about housing. Now, food and stuff is like that is probably comparable, but it's probably 20 to 40, 50% less on housing cost for rental and owning. So, I mean, I don't know how they think they're going to do this in a country as vast as Canada. We're talking a country that is bigger than both the Roman Empire and Byzantine Empire at their peaks. And people seem to forget how massive Canada is, and we're underpopulated for that too. But I don't know how they plan on doing that when, clearly like Yellowknife is not the same living cost as London, Ontario. London's not the same as Regina. Regina's not the same as York, and York is not the same as Vancouver. So good luck making a one-size-fits-all formula for all the provinces to abide by and expecting the math to work out. That's insanity.
You can't. And then consider services. Okay. So I know from personal experience that social services are different in different provinces.
Yes.
In some provinces, your lifestyle will be much better because of the services that are provided, whereas in another province, it's not going to be the same. And of course, those services cost money. So, I mean, in a great world, you move to where the services are that you need to access. It's frustrating that you have to do that, but that's what people wind up doing. How do you make it, like, do you take away all services to put in a UBI so that people can, I don't know, buy those services in different places? Or like, how exactly does that work? Because there's so many different types of services. Like you have devices for the handicap. You have services like training for handicapped people. And then you've got like the mental health facilities that there are in different parts of the country. You've got substance abuse issues and how those are administered in different parts of the country. And we have to remember, this is also a constitutional issue because it's the provinces that are responsible for education, healthcare, and social services. So how suddenly does UBI come in and just kind of blanket over all of those things that are supposed to be provincial jurisdiction?
I'm going to talk about the behind the scenes of that. Is if you do have a UBI, you're one step closer to centralized control of those social services.
Well, Marxism always comes up whenever people start talking about UBI because
something about the government being in control of who they think needs to have the money. Exactly. Something about that formula doesn't sit right with history, but I digress.
Are you, citizen or comrade, going to be allowed to access with your UBI?
Yeah. Oh, and then you get into like the digital ID arguments, right? Of where you have to be a good citizen to maybe get your UBI, and then the issues that come with that. But I wanted to touch on the fact that you have the UBI think tank that put this out, right? But also it's already, like, people don't understand, this has been tabled in the House of Commons, I believe. It was, I have it here, I actually wrote on it a while back, but guaranteed basic income has now been tabled in Canada. Bill C-273. It was a Liberal member of Parliament from Davenport, Toronto, Julie Dzerowicz, has tabled the bill that aims to, quote, establish a national strategy for basic income. So they're already looking for ways to implement this. I don't want people to think this is an abstract idea. It's just a think tank paper. It doesn't matter. No. The bill's already been tabled. They're looking for a way to implement a national strategy. And then you got a think tank. They don't go, you could say they're not the same, but they're going along with each other, same train of thought, and they're kind of, in my mind, working towards the same.
For people
ideas.
Who might not know, Queen's University had a debate during the last Ontario provincial election, which was just the beginning of this month, and one of the debates was specifically about, like, they were having the provincial candidates debate on UBI.
Yeah. And so they're bringing it into the political fray right now. I don't know that it's coming right away. Yeah. They're massaging it into the narrative. They're getting people used to the conversation.
Yes.
And that's usually the precursor to the legislation, right? Because even 273, it's not saying we're going to implement it. No, it's introducing you to the idea. It says we're going to implement a framework to roll it out.
Exactly. S233 is building the framework. And I think S233 must be like the C, what was it, 275?
237. So you're talking about a Senate one that's been brought forward as well?
Yeah, S233. So maybe it's the Bill C whatever was the House of Commons, and then that goes up to the Senate once it's passed the House of Commons, and then it I guess gets a different number whenever it makes it to the Senate maybe. I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that shakes out. I should know better. But
now I'm ashamed of myself for not knowing that. But
I can find out if I have to. So that's the UBI discussion in a nutshell. Look for that article. It is honestly like the speed that the government is moving on these ideas that were once considered fringe and radical is honestly breathtaking, because I don't think Canadians, you get the non-political Canadians, I just want to be left alone. And then things got really expensive on them. And then they had to take notice. And it's just been one thing after another, and watching people slowly kind of like pause that aren't political and then watch what's going on and shake their head.
Things on that. One is one of the big proponents of UBI is a retired conservative, shockingly, senator who his name was Hugh Siegel. And he wrote a book about it. Was it You Need Boots to Have Bootstraps? I haven't read all the book. I've only gotten started on it, but he's got a lot of information in his book, and it's very persuasive that it's a good idea. The unfortunate part is costing, and how do you actually implement it in a country like Canada? And the other thing, where was I going with that one? There's so much going on. It's like
the behavioral aspect of UBI too also doesn't get discussed much, but it's not that they're bad people, but there's a lot of people out there that, given the option that they could have enough money to pay their bills, not do anything, and they will take that option.
With CERB.
Yes, exactly. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard from employers that they're struggling to find people since CERB was implemented.
Yeah.
Specifically, because then people, well, I can get this much money for not doing anything. And it changed people's frame of mind around work too, because they were getting more money to sit at home and do nothing than working full-time at a minimum wage job, or even a job that paid slightly more than minimum. So those entry-level positions you looked at, it's like, well, I might as well take the handout.
Yeah, whenever you take the cost-benefit analysis, it makes more sense to sit at home than it does to go out to work in some instances. And that was the other thing I wanted to point out. Whenever you increase and this is economics 101, when you increase minimum wage, what winds up happening is the cost of living goes up, so that the people who get the new increase in their wage actually have no benefit, because the cost of living goes up. Like, you raise the minimum wage by 50 cents, the cost of living goes up by $1. So those people wind up actually better or worse off after a minimum wage increase than they were before they got it. And I mean, this is things that people from other countries that have experienced this know full well. And when they hear about Canada doing it, they just shake their heads and go like, what, are you crazy?
Oh, and then people don't think about, even on the minimum wage thing, like, if just for a logical second, put yourself in the shoes of a business owner. You got a kid, he's like 17, 18, he's never worked a day in his life. He walked in through your door. You have a 27-year-old, they have some work experience. They're looking for the same job. They just up the minimum wage at 15 or whatever. You're at this point, who are you taking? Are you taking the guy with no experience, or the one with a little, like, has some work experience? So young people typically get hurt the most on the minimum wage hikes. Yeah. And it's the biggest barrier is for young people under the age of 25. When the minimum wage goes up, it can help certain people. Like, don't get me wrong, it probably does help certain groups, but the young people get hit on the job front very hard. And I don't think Canadians understand that either.
No, and the other thing that they don't think about is that these business owners, their costs are going up and they still have to pay the same bills. So obviously they're going to have to raise their prices. You have to look at this circulation of the money, how, like, where you are in that path, and start figuring out what's going to make the most sense. And a lot of these policies just don't make sense.
Well, I was listening to an economist that he was actually, I think I sent you the video. He was the author of Quantitative Easing. And even he said, like, I want to write an article about this. Even he said, like, if you understand what quantitative easing is, he goes, I wouldn't have locked down. Mm-hmm. He goes, you're instantly causing inflation because it went directly. This was his argument. He goes, it went directly to household consumers. He goes, when banks give a loan, they are creating money out of thin air. They normally give that to businesses who then invest that in their business, and it kind of stays. The inflation happens, but it happens localized to a business, maybe like business parts, machines, things that aren't really consumer goods. But what the government did when they locked down is they confined all these funds and monies into people that had direct inflationary cost to it, because now you're going out, you got an extra $2,000 in your pocket a month or whatever it was, and people went, oh man, I got this extra money. Now they're going out buying things that they never otherwise would have. And when you have more people bidding on less goods, what happens, right? And it takes, they say, roughly 18 months, a year to a year and a half from the moment you shut off the tap, stop spending money you don't have, for the inflation to stop through the system. It's going to take about a year and a half. And what does our government do? Sorry, I just want to get this out there. They come out and they say, we're going to give out another $7 billion on the backs of the highest inflation we've experienced in over 40 years, which is obviously higher than they say it is, because if you know how they calculate the inflation, they've taken out a bunch of things that would actually show inflation is much higher than what they're telling you. I digress.
Well, and then you look at people who are sitting at home bored, that are obviously going to buy stuff. Amazon has had a field day during this whole COVID thing. And then you add that to Chrystia Freeland coming out with a statement that was something along the lines of, all of you people that have saved so much more money by being at home during the pandemic, we've got to figure out a way of getting that out of your pocket.
Yeah, and we just want to find a way to leverage the money that we've put in your pockets out of your pockets. You know, just help us find out how to do that without force. That would be great.
Yeah. How are we going to do that? Oh, hey, let's have some inflation, and that whole carbon tax thing that went up, and Mama needs a new pair of shoes, so let's give us a raise still while everybody else is hurting. Yeah,
well, wouldn't be typical politicians if they didn't give themselves a raise while others around the country were hurting. That just wouldn't make sense.
And it's hilarious that those taxes were increased, and they gave themselves a raise on April 1st. I mean, it just feels like they're calling us a bunch of fools, but it's just me, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're probably looking into that more than maybe I would, but I think maybe they do it on purpose and they just get a giggle about it. You'll never know. You'll never know.
It feels like that because, boy, there's been a lot of stuff happening on April 1st that feels like a little kick in the butt.
All right. There's the UBI. We're going to come back. There's an article coming out this week. Continuing on, we'll get through these last two topics. We'll close out. Typical mortgage payment could be 30% higher in 5 years. Bank of Canada warns those who took out a home loan in 2020 or 2021 should brace for higher rates at renewal. Enjoy. Turns out that when you have growth that is led by inflation, it always is followed by higher interest rates. And that's what we're seeing with the mortgage situation and the interest rate hikes that are going up. So it's not a small deal. If you got yourself into even the average price home in Ontario is like what, 600,000-700,000 these days.
That's what I hear. Yeah.
So what's 20-30% mortgage increase on 600,000-700,000? That's not a little bit of money. That is, you might lose your house money. And a lot of Canadians have been put into this position as a result of the fiscal choices of this government. Again, we didn't have to lock down. I don't care what all the other world did. We could have let common sense prevail here in Canada. But that did not happen.
Because we're so spread out, we probably would have had a better time anyway. But I have to point out, somebody had said that the last time that we had this kind of financial mess was in 1983. And gee, I think, that there's sort of this echo happening in my head of this name of the prime minister who was in power at the time.
He took a walk, I hear, in the snow.
Yes. That was about the time that he took the long walk in the snow. I wonder when Justin's going to take a long walk in the snow, just like his daddy.
I either feel like he's going to be in control forever, or he's going to end up walking the walk of shame. Like he'll just be what Harper couldn't be, right? He tries for the third term and somehow gets it. We'll just shake our heads, but he'd be here forever. But no, I fully expect he will at one point take the walk.
That's the prophecy, right? Or the idea of dictatorship dressed up as a democracy. I mean, because if he stays in power, I don't know.
Is it roughly 33 to 35% of the vote he got last? And what was it, like 52% of people that voted?
See, that's
under
where
55.
If the CPC are going to do something, then what they need to do is make sure that they massage this country the same way as Justin Trudeau does. They're going to have to find a way of making inroads in what I refer to as the Golden Triangle, which is Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto. Like, that is the area where the votes are really going to matter, because I'm sorry, Greg, but by the time the vote gets to you, you really don't have a voice anymore. I'm sorry. I keep telling you about these things that are happening to you now that you're a Westerner.
It's true. I do know. Like, it's the reality. And we had this joke the other night. You said, "Oh, you're just starting to sound like a real Saskatchewan." I said, I'm angry and bored. Maybe that's what it is. Because people out here are angry for sure because they're ignored. And maybe there's not enough to do down here in southern Saskatchewan. Man, I tell people where I'm from now, and it's just people that from Ontario can't understand. Like, it's 22,000 people, or less than 22,000. It's the third biggest economic hub in the province. Yep. That's where I live. So, all right, we're gonna continue on here. I think that's enough. We can touch on that. This is the final one, and then we'll kind of close out. This was the Bayer CEO. I mean, we could get really into the weeds on this, but we talked for a long time about informed consent. I've spoken with Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom lawyers about this exact issue, about what is true informed consent. And you need to understand what that is. Like, you need to understand what you're actually getting, what the potential repercussions are, what, the legal status of it, how it's being administered. All these things matter. Do you actually understand the potential risk and benefits? And now it comes out, you have the Bayer CEO kind of blowing up the social media landscape, because he's come out and he's admitted in a speech that it was what was that thing all those conspiracy theorists were calling it? We weren't calling it a vaccine.
Gene therapy, perhaps.
That's what it was. So the Bayer CEO came out and called the COVID vaccines gene therapy, and so that's kind of caused some waves, and we're going to play the video here for everyone. So Valuetainment, I like their stuff. Very same idea, long form discussions with high level people that are illuminating some very interesting topics that don't get very much coverage in the mainstream media or independent even. So I like their work. Check them out. Ultimately, he says the mRNA vaccines are an example for that selling gene therapy. Sorry, for that selling gene therapy. I always like to say, we had surveyed 2 years ago in the public, would you be willing to take gene therapy and inject it into your body? We would have probably had a 95% refusal rate. I think this pandemic has opened many people's eyes to an innovation in a way that maybe was not possible before. So I think we have the video. Is this the video? No, I don't. I just have a statement. That's no good. I'm going to find the video a second. It won't take me very long. I say that, but I also know YouTube gets in their takey down phase when they studio.
They don't like, the truth getting out there.
Especially when it's something like a CEO of a high level company that You know, they don't like to highlight these things if they don't have
Here's
to.
how practically anybody can make
goodness.
$1,000 a month using Audible. Okay, this is exactly what
Her voice for me was just like nails on a chalkboard instantly. I'm sorry to whoever that is, but that was ooh.
Painful.
Okay, here we go. I'm sorry, everyone.
Well, thank you, Axel. Lieber Herr Professor Ganten, lieber Axel Pries, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, it's really an honor and a privilege to be up here talking to you. Indeed, Axel and I share a lot of time during the year, at least on the board of Charité, where I have the honor to also serve. But I've also been a close follower and also active participant in the World Health Summit over the last 10 years at least. And Detlef, it's not only a privilege to be up here, but it's really amazing what you've created over the last 13 years, because what started as a small idea with a big vision today is much more than a small idea, but you truly live up to the name World Health Summit, because it has become a true reference every year and a fixture in everybody's calendar. So congratulations for that. I think unprecedented collaboration, transparency, but also taking accountability for health across all different sectors. And
I got to find the short form. I am sorry. I thought I clicked it. Here it is. So that's the full one. If you want to watch his full speech at that summit.
You like that you caught transparency.
I always like to say, if we had surveyed 2 years ago, ultimately the mRNA vaccines are an example for that cell and gene therapy. I always like to say, if we had surveyed 2 years ago in the public, would you be willing to take gene or cell therapy and inject it into your body? We would have probably had a 95% refusal rate. I think this pandemic has also opened many people's eyes to innovation in the way that was maybe not possible before.
Now, just on that topic, how many people were told explicitly that it is not gene therapy, it is a vaccine, and went out under those pretenses and got something that maybe they otherwise would have not felt comfortable with, based on the fact that it was new to circulation at that point.
Yeah, and another thing that has come out in adjacent to that, it's not quite the same, but they do gene therapy within the blind community as well. And I was following something in the blind community, and they have proven through that side of things that it affects the immune system. So the stuff that they were doing there, they're showing it affects the immune system in gene therapy. It's going to affect the immune system with the COVID vaccines, because that now we know was gene therapy. So people's immune systems are going to be damaged. There's just no way around it. The science will come out. It'll all kind of coalesce, and there's no way it can't come out that this is causing bigger problems, and it's going to cause bigger problems. And people did not know, because the people who made the vaccines, they didn't know the effects of it either, because there haven't been the human trials. The way that you would normally test any new kind of medication or treatment of any kind, it has to go through clinical trials, and those are long-term trials.
10 years would be a quick medical trial, and this is what I was explaining to people, like when people wouldn't understand my hesitancy and like why it. Well, one, it's new technology, and two, it's a new vaccine. So there's two fundamental things that were an issue for me. And then secondly, it's because they'll say it's because of the world-class collaboration that we were able to get this done in this period of time. I don't care. You might have been able to develop it in that frame of time because of the collaboration. I'm not denying that. No one is. Anyone with a reasonable set frame of mind. But it's the fact that you developed it in that frame of time, but you didn't have the 10 or 20 years of human trials and animal trials that would normally accompany it. And you said it was because it was such a such a dire need that you justified it under the Emergencies Act, that it wasn't even approved. Okay. And then they tried to debunk that, but no, it was under Emergencies Act. My understanding now is the emergency approval is still it's still under emergency approval, but they say one is approved, but they're not circulating that into circulation. The one that has been approved, they're still circulating the other one that was under emergency approval. So they've done some clinical administrative trickery.
Things going on, that sleight of hand stuff going on, that we don't really understand all of it. We may never, because so much of it they're trying to hide and they're trying to suppress. Barack Obama came out with a statement saying that the vaccines were the largest human trial in history of anything. So, I mean, there's admission. I remember there was a thing, and you could even look them up on YouTube. I didn't prepare it because I hadn't thought of this at the time, but there was a guy from the CIA. He's known as the Spy Whisperer. And if you look up Spy Whisperer on YouTube, you should be able to find it. And this was a talk that he was doing. I think it was kind of like his retirement talk or something, that happened in February of 2020. And the date is important because COVID was just starting to happen. He stated then that there was something like a 97% recovery rate from COVID. And so he was not afraid of that. What he was afraid of was the divisiveness that was happening in the media and what that was doing to society. So he, who had worked in China, was brushing off the seriousness of COVID back before we had done any kind of lockdowns or anything else.
And then you get into all the discrepancies, and I know people don't want to hear it. They hear some of these things and they tune out because they hear like a conspiracy theorist. But you have that emergency approval. That's how it gets implemented. Then you have employers forcing people against their will to get this thing that's under emergency approval. They're losing their jobs. They're losing their pensions. They're losing their careers. You have the media that starts basically calling people bad people after the prime minister, who amplifies that message and further drives a wedge in between it. And these are the fundamental building blocks of what happened. People don't want to talk about a mishandling, but there's other discrepancies that went on too. Like, where did the flu go for 2 years? Why did we test 1 million people a day in Ontario with the test at levels that were higher than anything the medical papers said could actually pick up live virus? Like, if you read the New England Journal of Medicine, there's a bunch of papers out there that talk about nothing was able to be cultured from these PCR tests above 25 cycles. Well, Ontario, I did a phone call with public health way back when, and they admitted to me online on the line, like, no, we run 38 to 40 cycles, or 38 to 45. 38, anything under 38 was considered a confirmed positive, and anything up to 45 was considered indeterminate. So let's just back that up. The official medical papers at the time were saying we can't culture anything from these tests, meaning nothing's infectious, above 25 cycles. We were calling Canadians positive that were running all the way up to 38. So we were amplifying it way, 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 way higher. You could pick up dead virus from months ago, and they were using this 1 million times a day. And the flu was nowhere to be found, apparently. And they were using it to justify emergency measures that allowed them to go into the House, have no debate on their bills, and essentially just write policy at the stroke of a pen. And it was great for them for 2 years.
Oh, yeah. They could do whatever they wanted. And in, where was it, in Winnipeg, the bureaucrats were exempt from some of the mandates. So they could go to the gym, they could go and whatever they wanted to do, but the regular people couldn't.
Like Jason Kenney getting caught aboard. Like, I don't care if you're conservative, MDP, liberal. Like, we talk about being good people wherever you're at. You call out things that aren't truthful, that are dishonest, that are manipulative, lies. You do that. That's the right thing to do. Jason Kenney.
He was talking about.
Yeah. Like, I mean, he's literally on top of the Sky Palace sipping whiskey while people are losing their jobs, their businesses, because he mandated that they shut him down. He can go up there. He can have a dinner with no mask on and close contact. He can drink whiskey on the public dime. Yeah. I don't know for sure that it was the public dime, so I should say that. But like, he can do these things while we're under lockdown, and that's okay. Justin Trudeau, he goes out and he's maskless in the Netherlands, and he gets caught at a bar in a party. That's okay. You know, he can go to his cottage. Doug Ford can go to his cottage. I mean, down and down the list you go. Like, there was I need to get back to working on my book on that. But there is so much hypocrisy from our leaders, conservative, NDP, liberal. They didn't believe in the own things they were doing. Now, I'll give you the opposite argument, the left side argument, or the people that are whole believers in the COVID narrative the government put out. They'll say, yes, but just because government officials do shitty things or do bad things doesn't mean it's not true that you shouldn't be doing those things. They're just hypocrites. No, the way I take it is they have privy information. They have access to the best experts the nation and the world has to offer. They were presented all that information. They said, you know what? I'm going out to the party. I'm going to the God.
Here's one of the oldest sayings in the book: actions speak louder than words. What were their actions? Follow their actions, not their words. They were telling us to do stuff while they were behaving differently.
And all around the world, like Boris Johnson's party just had a vote to decide if they were going to kick the prime minister out of the party because he was having parties, lavish parties with his members of parliament all during COVID. There was a number of them. And so they literally just voted on this because the guy was out partying constantly while people are losing. Like, I can't stress this enough. Losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, their pensions, sometimes losing their relationships with loved ones over the wedge that politicians chose to drive home.
And here's when you mentioned pensions, and I have to bring this up now. I'm working on an article now about the military and how some of those members have been so horribly coerced into getting the vaccination that some of them were, it's called 5F'd, which is a type of release that it's a dishonorable release and you cannot get your pension because of it. And people who have had over 19 years in the military, so they were close to their 20 years for their pension, have been 5F'd out of the military simply because they were not comfortable for whatever reason in getting that vaccination.
And to those people, if you are one of those members that has been 5F from the military, you'd like to come speak to a media source about your story, maybe you'd like to stay anonymous. I understand that. We would love to have those stories and to help tell them, because you're right. Like, it's easy to get caught in the weeds and go, well, they lost their job, they lost their pension, and just one off it. But there's a person behind those stories. There's a family, there's a loved one, there's somebody whose life was turned upside down. And I can't imagine, especially when you get into the Canadian Armed Forces, military, things like this, people that have suffered PTSD, they've seen some of the worst things. Some of these people, they've served overseas. And then you're like, hey, I know you suffered a lot and you did all these sacrifices all those years away from family, tours, training, but you know what? We don't give a shit. There's the door. You disagreed with what we said was a priority for us, and then out with the trash. And that is literally what they've done with these members that, like you said, there's a 19-year-old veteran that's given a huge chunk of his life, a lot of sacrifice, and they're just willing to pull that rug underneath, even though in a heartbeat, even though 85+% of the country did exactly what they said, highest all around the world. Like, we are on top of the charts in all those metrics that they said were important, and they still chose to punish these people and to pull that rug and turn their lives upside down over nothing more, in my opinion, than spite. The prime minister is spiteful. He has a massive ego, and he got violated during the Freedom Convoy, and now he's on a vengeance. But now he's playing the political high wire act where he's balancing his anger and his ego with the political acumen that needs to happen to stay in power. Thank goodness for Jagmeet Singh, who is more than willing to sacrifice his character and integrity at the altar of a pension.
Yep.
Okay.
And hey, and while we're at it, like, let's just throw in Roe v. Wade, which seems to be the absolute obsession with our government right now, because heaven forfend they should actually deal with anything that's going on in Canada. And that includes our media that is bought and paid for by our government, who are doing nothing more than propagandizing the stuff in the States so that they don't have to deal with what's actually happening in Canada.
No, let's be clear. There is no reason for any Canadian politician to comment on Roe v. Wade other than the virtue signal. Does their legal decision affect any of the bearing of what we're doing here? Has anybody brought up a proposition similar? No. Shut your mouth. Get out in front of the camera. You have no business being out in virtue signaling like Trudeau was doing today with Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly. That was a really awkward exchange for those willing to look it up. Melanie Joly talking and then apologizing to the Prime Minister for not getting out what seemed like a semi-scripted phrase Like she was like, it just like,
I know.
did I do it right, Justin? Did I do it
Sexual
right?
services, and I'm like, what kind of sexual services are we talking about? I'm sorry.
Well, they're in Rwanda, just to clarify, and they have given out more of our Canadian taxpayer dollars, is my understanding, for what is it, reproductive services. They like to do that under the Trudeau government. Bangladesh was getting like $60 million to an organization. I think it's called BRICS, but it's the same idea. It's like it's for gender rights and reproduction, and they always classify it as it's like gender equality and rights, and then they'll send like 10 million here, 60 million there. Yeah. I could do a whole show just on the grants that they send out to other countries through foreign funding.
I also love the way that Melanie Joly was talking about, you know, women's rights and everything, and yet the abortion thing that she was talking about that was brought up by the Conservative Party in Canada was sex-selected abortion, which means that the little baby girls she doesn't care about. They don't have any rights.
Which, I mean, if you're arguing in favor of sex-selective abortion, you're a monster. Like, I'm okay doing this because I think politically it's the right thing to do for my career. Morally, that's reprehensible.
Exactly.
Like you're going to stand there with a straight face and tell Canadians that you think it's okay to kill boys over girls or girls over boys?
Yeah. Well, it's generally girls over boys, right? Because people want boys. So historically and culturally.
Yeah. Yeah. Typically you want it's the males needs to carry on the bloodline. There's that, I don't agree with it, but that is this old school mentality that comes through in sex selective abortion. But there will be an article. You sent me that, and I will make an article on that tabloid type article. But basically, Justin Trudeau, just so we all know, I still can't believe that's real. You sent it to me, and I'm like, what? Well, so is this like 2011 or 2013? Like this is before he ran, right?
It was 2011. So I think that was before he was. Before he was the leader of the Liberal Party, I think he was a member of Parliament, but not the leader of the party. I have to look at that again because I can't remember.
It sounds right though, but he essentially says like, although he is pro-choice, I don't know the words he says, I don't like abortion. Like it's not nice or something like that.
We're coming after him for saying that he doesn't like abortion.
But this is the same guy who says that he doesn't see a problem with FGM or female genital mutilation. Like how can that be the same person? I can tell you how. No values. He does the political finger in the air and he goes, that's what I believe right now.
Well, and come out with a statement like what happened in the United States is horrendous, even though he said just a few years, 10 years, well, now I guess it's about 11 years ago, that he doesn't like abortion, but now it's horrendous not to be able to have one.
You think when I follow up with the Prime Minister's office, they'll care to answer about his changing of opinions over a decade? How did he arrive from
questions? Come on.
I know. So that's why I asked it. Like, do you think like they'd be like, in 10 years, how did you get from I don't like abortion to pretending to almost cry in front of the cameras because Roe v. Wade was overturned in the United States? Again, no bearing on judicial proceedings here in Canada. But man, did he see? He really put on the drama teacher acumen. I was impressed. Like he really brought out those skills.
I came up with this thing. Those who can do, those who can't teach, those who can't do or teach become Prime Minister of Canada.
Oh, that hurts a little. That shouldn't be funny, but like, what's it like living in Canada? This short clip is a perfect analogy. Oh, that hurt to laugh at. It's too true. This comedy is rooted in truth, but sometimes truth just hurts. Yeah, that's Canada in a nutshell. So from PS 752 to Nova Scotia and political interference and all the things we've talked about today, this is Canada in a nutshell. So I think this would be a good place to close out. Again, I will be short clipping out videos throughout the week. Please help us share these out. We definitely need help getting this important story into the hands of other independent media and mainstream media. So if you do want to help, tag your favorite independent media outlets with the story when it does come out, which should be shortly, and any short clip or the long form interview. And let's see if we can't cause a ripple up and get this story noticed on the national level for Canada. Because again, this is a pattern here that has been.
And the only way we get justice is by putting a light on what's going wrong.
Yeah. And there's an active ongoing investigation into this RCMP commissioner over political, or not over political. Well, they would say, is it political interference or is it, we don't know, but she's refusing to prosecute.
She's unwilling to do an investigation, which, what is it? It's like her behavior as the commissioner is the thing that's in question. I can't remember what the term was.
It's a code of conduct investigation.
Yeah.
So currently under a code of conduct investigation. Sorry, Mr. Brooke. I know we just butchered that for you. And this is ongoing. Nobody's talking about it in the mainstream media. Ongoing investigation. And then we just have another one that popped on the radar for Canadians, and that this is looking like a reoccurring issue. And one needs to look no further back than Jody Wilson-Raybould, Jane Philpott. And you maybe can start seeing that this government has a habit of putting themselves in positions they are not supposed to be.
Yeah.
And that's a good place to end. Thank you for joining Diverge Media. Gillian, I really do appreciate it. Mr. Brooke, I appreciate you joining us, and we will do our best to continue to bring Canadians the stories that matter and amplify stories like this that need the coverage, that need to be discussed, and that have really a national importance here in Canada. Do you have any closing thoughts, Gillian?
Just keep sharing the information, whether it comes from us or whether it comes from somebody else. If it's good information, just keep throwing it out there so that people start to hear what's really going on.
Absolutely. Until next time, everyone, Diverge Media.